Zenigata presents a slideshow of the gang to Patra Lawrence, a princess and special agent in Mecca. Also descended from, I think his name was Tom something or other. She dismisses Zenigata and arranges to have him sent back to Interpol, wanting to handle Lupin herself. The gang are in the area due to a tip from Fujiko about a heavily guarded sacred treasure. Goemon spots the dreaded Zantetsuken shadow in play, but Lupin dismisses it as the heat causing the blade to change colour. At least until they're bombarded by a missile strike. Later, the gang infiltrates as members of the Guard. They discover the safe containing the treasure is over an oil well, meaning that they'll flood the chamber if Goemon cuts it open. As they head back to base, they get attacked by Patra. She proves quicker on the draw than Jigen, but he determines she only has 6 shots, as she's using a Black Hawk Magnum. Counting the remaining shots, Jigen and Lupin charge forward. Too bad for them, they didn't realise she brought backup. Her target is Lupin, taking him captive and burying Jigen, saying she doesn't deal with small fry like him. Goemon launches an attack as Lupin is escorted, but Patra is armed with an electrically charged sword. In prison, Lupin occupies himself with a way to get rid of the oil as a soldier informs him his sentence will soon be carried out. Zenigata is transported by plane out of the country, complaining that his conditions are making him sick and wanting medicine. No one tell him that cow dung is a good medicine in a few diseases. Lupin's pretty casual about his execution, simply asking for one last cigarette. He's granted his wish, and the heat from the cigarette allows Jigen to detect him. Jigen disarms Patra and Goemon launches an aerial strike to allow Lupin to escape in the confusion. Lupin planted a bug on Patra as he escaped, and using this they overhear Patra asking for guidance that the treasure isn't stolen. Tracking the oil well, they learn it runs all the way down to Antarctica. Spilling some wine gives Lupin an idea how to cut it off. The gang fly out to Antarctica and blast open a hole. They then run electrodes through it with the intent being to draw off the oil well from this end. They head back and wait for the oil well to open in their Antarctica hole, as evidenced by the safe sacred flame going out. The whole thing seems to be for naught though, as the treasure inside has degraded to dust. Later, an old woman confronts Patra on a plane as she was hired by several governments to siphon off the oil for their gain. The old woman's Lupin, who discovered that there was a Patra Lawrence, but she was born in 1918 and the one he sat next to doesn't look 62. This one's Fujiko, and Lupin decides her payment is his given he siphoned the oil. There's something kind of funny about superhero playing as a massive oil spill covers Antarctica. Bit of an implausible story in a few ways, such as how Fujiko managed to infiltrate the Guards that well with no questions. That said, given she cuts off Zenigata at the beginning when he gets to Fujiko's description, I suppose it was foreshadowed. That and taking her time to mock Jigen, likely as revenge for how distrustful he usually is towards her. Fujiko is present at a Carnegie Hall performance headed by the pianist Kerensky. Later, she interrupts the gang's poker game in order to steal an item from Prague. She wants to hear Kerensky play on the rare jovich piano, of which only 2 exist in the world. Jigen and Goemon aren't enthusiastic, but Fujiko entices them with how tricky the security might be. She then meets with Kerensky, who remains reserved as to whether Lupin can pull it off. After a quick evasion from Zenigata, the gang arrive in Prague. The building where the jovich is stored is too heavily guarded for them to enter directly, however. Goemon points out the sewers, so they navigate to where they need. The piano storeroom is in sight, but Goemon stops Lupin from opening a door that turns out to not only be electrified, but also tied to the alarm. The gang disappear back into the sewers as a result. Lupin spies Zenigata joining the security. Zenigata decides to take a look at the jovich, but is warned away by a guard, who shows him the lasers set up around it. Lupin spots this, but his check gets cut short when the guards spot him. Lupin and Jigen disguise as repairmen and get given half an hour to maintain the piano. Or rather, dismantle the piano. They also make use of a covering panel above in order to keep it hidden. Zenigata's none the wiser as he escorts them out, even with a piece of the piano falling into his view. Before reactivating the security, Zenigata decides to try playing the jovich, only to discover it's a balloon. Lupin is chased, but manages to evade thanks to an oncoming car. Zenigata manages to track down his truck to a barn, but finds it abandoned. He spots tyre tracks and figures they have another vehicle to transport the piano. Setting up a traffic check, he first turns his attention to a hay truck. Ultimately he finds nothing. His next point of interest is a mobile zoo, with the disguised Jigen confronting him. Jigen shows him that the animals can appear as he calls them, first showing a gorilla. The gorilla is Lupin, who switches to a lion when prompted. Zenigata's almost convinced, but asks to see a panda. Lupin doesn't have a panda costume on hand, so he has to improvise. Zenigata's convinced and they move on. Presenting the piano to Fujiko and Kerensky, the latter readies a performance, complete with audience consisting of police. The performance is cut short as the jovich falls apart. Lupin tosses a screw from it to Zenigata before running. Fujiko's less impressed as she didn't get to hear Kerensky, so tosses Lupin out of a car once they're far enough away. Security seems to have a massive blind spot in this episode when it comes to the gang hiding. That said, it is nice to see Zenigata showing some police skills here, even if he does miss his target at the end of the day. As far as Kerensky goes, it's a shame to see a priceless piano get wrecked like that, but after he betrayed the gang, it was at least partially deserved. The gang have come to Nice for a beach party. Jigen and Goemon are more concerned with the real reason, that being there's a diamond shipment coming in soon. Both of them walk, figuring this is just another of Fujiko's self-serving heists. Lupin and Fujiko spy on the shipment as it arrives in port, with Lupin figuring Zenigata is on call for security. Using the back alleys to follow the truck, Lupin fires it with a mark. The trailer is stored in a warehouse, which Lupin plans to come back for that night. The police store it with identical trailers, with one officer finding the mark. Zenigata tells them to redraw it on another trailer to fool Lupin. Night comes and Fujiko breaks into the storehouse. She finds the mark and guides Lupin to it, who's worked a coupling to his van. They don't get far as Zenigata's waiting outside. He reveals that they're driving a fake trailer. Lupin drives off anyway, but forced to ditch the vehicle thanks to nearly driving in the water. A helicopter attacks, but Goemon's on hand to help. Jigen also shoots out the police's searchlights, but Fujiko gets cuffed. The highway the diamonds are being transported through has been lined with police officers. Zenigata reveals to Fujiko that he also has a trap ready in the form of a switch that opens part of the bridge down to a cage in the river below. Jigen warns that something's up with the highway, but Lupin drives up to it anyway, wanting to see what challenge awaits. He then taunts Zenigata before driving ahead. Using a truck for leverage, Lupin jumps back down to the road, or field, below. After an encounter with a collapsing cliff, the gang pull up by a truck. Jigen tests the truck and discovers it still works. Driving further up, they scope out a part of the highway that's unguarded, figuring that's the likely spot for the trap. The gang split up and Lupin heads back to Zenigata. He tosses a hook underneath Zenigata's car after some banter. Goemon and Jigen also arrive in place and get ready. With the grappling hook towing his van, Lupin climbs onto Zenigata's car and clowns around. Jigen fires at the truck and uncouples the trailer. Goemon cuts up part of the bridge railing and it hooks onto Jigen's truck as it passes by. Zenigata activates the trap as they drive over the spot, but Lupin rescues Fujiko and jumps away. As Zenigata is shipped off in his own cage, Lupin and Fujiko celebrate their prize. Can't go wrong with a good car chase, honestly. Also good to see a victorious heist after what seems like a while now. They definitely pulled out the budget for this episode too, as visually it looks good, and animation wise they certainly had a lot of small details here and there. Sometimes the perspective makes Lupin's car look kinda small though. We open on the gangster Minnesota Fats winning a game of pool. He receives a phone call from a man named Don Hiron, who hires him to kill Jigen. Speaking of which, he's busy washing his hat collection while Lupin and Goemon enjoy a card game. The game's cut short when Jigen calls them outside, discovering his hats are burned. None have been spared, but Jigen acts cagey as to what the problem is. Fats calls asking for Jigen, calling him to a hotel room. Lupin decides to go in his place, and gets directed to a pile of books on Jigen. Fats does research on his targets and learned that Jigen's hat helps his aim. Lupin decides to challenge Fats but gets dismissed as an amateur. To demonstrate this, he fires at Lupin with a gun fashioned from his pool cue. The bullet ricochets and chases Lupin downstairs and outside. Goemon witnesses this and charges up to Fats himself, but all he finds is a note meant to taunt Jigen. Jigen's aim is not at its best, to put it mildly. Lupin's idea of alternate hats doesn't help matters either. Fujiko arrives with a job that involves Jigen, laughing at his alternative headwear. Zenigata was also hitching a ride, but the gang ditch him after giving his hat a try. Zenigata has a tracker planted so he's able to follow them to their hideouts. After explaining Jigen's situation to her, Fujiko tells them that the owner of the Big Mac company has recently died, willing his gun collection worth 100 million to the best shooter. Don Hiram was his assistant, and hired Fats to take out Jigen so he could lay claim. Fats was only paid 300,000, but is more in it to prove himself as the best rather than for money. Jigen decides to face him head on, moving the listening Zenigata and telling him he'll let them stay free until this is over. Lupin gets an idea while gripping his chair in thought. Jigen meets with Fats, and Hiron's assistant appears as a witness to the fight. The fight goes badly for Jigen, but he manages to escape to the airport, where Lupin's waiting. Fats catches up and fires on Lupin's plane. Jigen bails out to a mountaintop and is met by Goemon, giving him some skis for mobility. Fats catches up and fires, but his bullets won't bounce due to the snow cushioning them. Undeterred, Fats offers Jigen some free shots, to which Jigen misses all of them. Fats fires back, but unlike Jigen, he wasn't using a silencer and causes an avalanche. Jigen is pulled away at the last second and the assistant also grabs on, declaring Jigen the winner. To celebrate his victory, Fujiko presents Jigen with a new hat tailor-made for him. I do wonder if this was written at an earlier point in time and held back, as it seems a bit of a late point to introduce a plot detail like this. Still, made for a good episode at the very least. While not quite as well animated as Jigen's previous duel, it's certainly up there. Some good lighting in a few places too, such as the pool hall at the beginning. Also nice to see that even with their mutual dislike, Fujiko was the one to help Jigen out with a new hat at the end. Next time we come to the end of Series 2 with an encounter with a nun, a golden wall and a mysterious robot. Until then.